The mountain wind carried secrets through the pines, whispers of ancient things that walked between shadow and moonlight. 28-year-old Saskia Morven had learned to listen to those whispers. As a wolf behavior specialist and rehabilitation expert, she'd spent the last 6 years in the remote Carpathian wilderness, running a sanctuary for wolves displaced by human expansion or injured by poachers. Her facility, nestled in a valley 3 hours from the nearest village, had become legendary among conservationists, and mysterious among the locals who spoke of it only in hushed tones. They called her the Wolf Whisperer, though Saskia found the name ridiculous. There was no magic involved, only patience, respect, and an almost supernatural ability to understand the complex social structures and communication patterns of Canis lupus. She could read their body language like poetry, interpret their vocalizations like a native language she'd been born speaking. Tonight, under a waning crescent moon, Saskia stood at the edge of the main enclosure, watching her pack settle in for the evening. There were 12 wolves in total, 7 greys, 3 timber wolves, and 2 Arctic whites she'd rescued from an illegal breeding operation in Romania. At the center of the pack lay Freya, the alpha female, a magnificent gray with amber eyes that held centuries of wild wisdom. But something was different tonight. Saskia felt it in the tension rippling through the pack, saw it in the way the wolves kept glancing toward the northern tree line, ears swiveling, noses testing the wind. They weren't afraid exactly, but they were alert in a way that made Saskia's instincts prickle. "What is it, girl?" she murmured, approaching Freya with the slow, respectful movements that acknowledged the wolf's dominance. Freya's tail gave a single wag, recognition, not submission, and her eyes tracked something Saskia couldn't yet see. That's when she noticed him. A figure stood at the tree line, perfectly still, almost invisible in the deep shadows between the pines. Saskia's hand instinctively moved to the radio at her hip. It was nearly midnight. No one should be here, especially not standing 20 feet from a wolf enclosure. Trespassers were rare but not unheard of, wildlife photographers, thrill seekers, occasionally someone with darker intentions. "This is private property," Saskia called out, her voice firm and carrying. "You need to leave immediately." The figure didn't move, didn't respond. The wolves, strangely, hadn't made a sound, no warning growls, no alarm barks. They simply watched, with that same alert curiosity Freya displayed. Saskia felt her pulse quicken. Something was very wrong about this. She grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from her belt and aimed it at the intruder. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating. Her breath caught. He was perhaps the most striking man she'd ever seen, with sharp, aristocratic features that seemed carved from pale marble. Dark hair fell past his shoulders in waves that caught the flashlight beam like black silk. He wore clothing that seemed simultaneously timeless and out of place. A long coat that might have been fashionable a century ago, dark trousers, boots designed for traveling rather than fashion. But it was his eyes that held her frozen, pale gray, almost silver, and fixed on her with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said, his voice low and accented with something old European, impossible to place exactly. "I mean no harm. I've been watching your work from a distance." "That's not comforting," Saskia replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "How long have you been watching?" "Long enough to know you're remarkable at what you do." He took a single step forward, moving with a fluid grace that seemed almost inhuman. "The wolves trust you completely. That's rare." Saskia noticed something odd. Freya had stood up and was walking toward the fence, not in aggression but in what looked like recognition. The other wolves followed, forming a line along the enclosure's edge, all focused on the stranger. "They know you," Saskia said slowly. "How do they know you?" The man's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I've spent time here. At night, when you're asleep. I've run with them, in my own way. They've accepted me as, not quite pack, but not threat either. Something in between." Alarm bells rang in Saskia's mind. This man had been on her property, near her wolves, without permission. That was illegal, dangerous, and deeply disturbing. And yet, "I should call the authorities," she said. "You could. But you won't." He moved closer to the fence, and in the better light, Saskia noticed something else. His skin had an almost luminescent quality, as if lit from within by very faint moonlight. "You're too curious. You want to know how I've managed to gain their acceptance. How I've moved among them without you ever knowing." He was right, damn him. Saskia's scientific mind was already racing with questions. Wolves were territorial, protective, especially of their established pack structure. For a stranger to move among them without triggering defensive behavior was nearly impossible, unless they recognized him as something non-threatening, something that occupied a different ecological niche entirely. "What are you?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. His smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed just slightly too sharp in the flashlight beam. "Perceptive. Most people ask who. You ask, what? Because you're not normal. The way you move, the way the wolves react to you, the way you're standing here at midnight like darkness is your natural habitat." Saskia took a breath. "And because your shadow is wrong." She'd noticed it subconsciously at first, but now it was obvious. The flashlight beam hit him directly, yet his shadow was faint, translucent, as if he were somehow less solid than he appeared. "Alaric," he said, extending his hand through the fence in a gesture that seemed both archaic and oddly courteous. "My name is Alaric Thorne. And you're right, I'm not entirely human anymore. Haven't been for a very long time." Saskia stared at the offered hand. Every rational part of her brain screamed at her to back away, to call for help, to run. But the wolves were calm. Freya had settled on her haunches near the fence, watching this interaction with interest but not concern. And if there was one thing Saskia trusted absolutely, it was Freya's judgment. She reached out and clasped his hand. The moment their skin touched, ice flooded up her arm, not painful, but shocking, like plunging into a winter stream. His hand was cold, impossibly cold, yet strong. And in that moment of contact, she felt something else, an overwhelming sense of age, of depths and darkness and centuries stretching back into time immemorial. She jerked her hand back, gasping. "Vampire," she whispered. "You're a vampire." Alaric inclined his head, a gesture that belonged to another era. "I am. And before you reach for that radio again, know that I've been coming here for 3 months now. If I'd wanted to harm you or your wolves, I would have done so already. Instead, I've protected them. Twice I've driven off poachers who meant to breach your fence. Once I stopped a rockslide that would have destroyed the northern enclosure. You never knew because I made sure you didn't need to." Saskia's mind spun. Vampires. Actual vampires. The logical, scientific part of her brain insisted this was impossible, that she was hallucinating or dreaming. But the evidence was right in front of her. The unnatural cold of his skin, the wrong shadow, the way he'd appeared and moved with impossible silence, the wolves' inexplicable acceptance of him. "Why?" she asked. "Why protect my sanctuary? Why reveal yourself now?" "Because something is coming," Alaric said, his expression growing serious. "Something that threatens both your wolves and you. I've tried to handle it myself, but I need your help now. Your knowledge. Your connection to the pack." "What kind of something?" "Hunters. But not the poachers you're used to. These hunters seek supernatural prey. They've tracked me here, and now they believe your wolves are infected, that I've turned them somehow, made them into creatures like myself. Which is nonsense, of course. My kind cannot turn animals, only humans. But these hunters don't care about facts. They'll kill every wolf in this sanctuary and burn it to the ground looking for proof of corruption." Saskia felt cold fury rising in her chest. "How long do we have?" 3 days. Maybe 4 if the mountain weather turns and slows them down. "And you want me to what? Trust you? Work with you? A vampire I just met who's been skulking around my property for months." Alaric's gray eyes held hers steadily. "Yes. Because you love these wolves enough to do anything to protect them. Even make deals with monsters." He was right again, and Saskia hated how easily he read her. She looked at Freya, at the pack she'd built from broken, traumatized animals, wolves who'd learned to trust again under her care. She thought of them slaughtered by fanatics who saw demons in every shadow. "If you hurt them, if you hurt anyone here, I will find a way to destroy you, she said quietly. I don't care what you are or how powerful you think you are. Do you understand? Alaric's smile returned, genuine this time, with something that might have been respect. I would expect nothing less. Now, may I come in? We have much to discuss, and I find conversations are better conducted without barriers between. Saskia hesitated only a moment before walking to the gate and unlocking it. The moment she pulled it open, Alaric stepped through, and Freya immediately approached him. To Saskia's amazement, the alpha wolf pressed her muzzle against his hand in a gesture of greeting, tail wagging slowly. How? Saskia breathed. Wolves are old souls, Alaric said softly, running his fingers through Freya's fur with obvious affection. They remember when humans were less dominant, when other things walked the night. They recognize predators, yes, but also kindred spirits. They know I hunt, but not them. They know I run in darkness, as they do. We understand each other. He looked up at Saskia, and she saw something in his ancient eyes that shocked her, loneliness. I've been alone a very long time, he said quietly. When I found your sanctuary, found wolves who didn't fear me but didn't attack either, who simply accepted my presence. It was the first peace I'd known in decades. I've protected this place not just because it needs protection, but because it became the closest thing to home I've had in a century. Saskia felt her anger soften slightly. She understood that loneliness, that sense of being separate from the human world. She'd felt it herself, choosing wolves over people, wilderness over civilization. All right, she said. Tell me everything. Who are these hunters, what do they want, and how do we stop them? Alaric's expression turned grim. Come. Let's go to your cabin. This will take time, and the wolves are restless. They feel the danger coming too. As they walked toward the small log cabin that served as Saskia's home and office, the pack followed along the fence line, a silent escort of fur and watchful eyes. The night had taken on a surreal quality, as if Saskia had stepped through some invisible barrier into a world where myths breathed and ancient things walked beside her. At the cabin door, she paused and looked back at Alaric. One more thing. Do you need to? Feed, he supplied. Not for another week, and never from anyone unwilling. I've learned control over my very long life. Your safety is not at risk from that particular need. Good, Saskia said, pushing open the door. Because if you tried, Freya would probably rip your throat out, vampire or not. Alaric laughed, a sound like distant thunder. I like you, Saskia Morven. You're fierce. The wolves chose their alpha well. Inside the cabin, Saskia lit the oil lamps. She'd always preferred their warm glow to harsh electric lights, and put on a pot of coffee. Alaric settled into a chair near the wood stove with the ease of someone who'd watched centuries pass and learned patience. The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable. Rough-hewn furniture, bookshelves crammed with wildlife biology texts and journals, photographs of wolves pinned to every available surface, and a large topographical map of the region marked with tracking data. You really do live for them, Alaric observed, studying the photos. They're worth living for, Saskia replied, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. Unlike most humans I've met. A sentiment I understand perhaps better than you know. He accepted a cup when she offered it, though she noticed he didn't drink. Probably for courtesy's sake. Tell me, what drew you to wolves specifically? Most people fear them. Saskia sat across from him, wrapping her hands around her own mug. They're misunderstood. Vilified for being predators, for following their nature. They're loyal, intelligent, capable of complex emotions and social structures that rival our own. And they're dying out because humans can't share the world with anything they don't control. She met his eyes. I imagine you understand something about being vilified for your nature. More than you know, Alaric said softly. Though in my case, some of the vilification is earned. My kind have done terrible things throughout history. But not you. I didn't say that. His expression grew distant. I've lived for 412 years, Saskia. In that time, I've been both monster and guardian, predator and protector. I've killed when I needed to survive, and I've killed when anger or desperation drove me to darkness. I've also saved lives, protected innocence, tried to atone for the blood on my hands. I am not a good creature pretending to be evil, nor an evil one pretending it good. I simply am, and I try to be better than my nature demands." The honesty in his words surprised her. Saskia had expected deflection, perhaps charm or manipulation. Instead, he offered uncomfortable truth. "Tell me about these hunters," she said. Alaric set down the untouched coffee and leaned forward. "They call themselves the Order of Sanctified Dawn. They're an old organization, dating back to the medieval period, dedicated to hunting and destroying supernatural creatures. In the past, they served a purpose. There were vampires, werewolves, and other beings who preyed on humans without restraint. The Order kept the balance, prevented wholesale slaughter. And now they're zealots. The world has changed, supernatural populations have dwindled, and most of those who remain have learned to coexist quietly. But the Order refuses to evolve. They see demons everywhere, corruption in every shadow. They've become the very thing they once fought against, killers who justify murder with righteousness." Saskia felt a chill. She'd dealt with human zealots before, protesters who claimed her sanctuary was playing God, that wolves were evil beasts that deserved extinction. The hatred in their eyes had been terrifying in its absolute certainty. "How did they find you?" she asked. "I was careless." Alaric's jaw tightened. 3 months ago, I fed from a traveler who turned out to be a scout for the Order. I left him alive, as I always do, but he marked me somehow. They've been tracking me since, and the trail led here. Now they believe I've corrupted your wolves, created some kind of hybrid abomination. They have documents, testimonies from locals about demon wolves prowling these mountains. That's insane. My wolves are completely normal, just rehabilitated. I know. But the Order won't care. They'll kill first and justify it later. They always do. Saskia stood and paced to the window, looking out at the enclosure where her pack slept. "So what do we do? Fight them? Run?" Fighting would only confirm their suspicions and bring more hunters. Running would mean abandoning your sanctuary, leaving the wolves vulnerable to whatever the Order decides to do in your absence. Alaric rose and moved to stand beside her, his presence cold but somehow comforting. "No, we need to be clever. We need to prove the wolves are exactly what they appear to be, normal animals under the care of a dedicated conservationist. And we need to make me disappear so completely that the Order loses my trail and moves on. How do we prove anything to people who've already decided what they believe? By giving them what they expect to find, then revealing it as false. By making them question their own evidence." A slight smile played at his lips. "I've survived 4 centuries by being adaptable, Saskia. I know how to manipulate perception, how to misdirect hunters who think themselves infallible. And what do you need from me? Your knowledge, your scientific credibility, and most importantly, your connection to the wolves." He turned to face her fully. "If we can demonstrate that your pack responds normally to standard wolf behavior protocols, that they show no abnormal characteristics, we undermine the Order's entire premise. Meanwhile, I'll lead them on a chase through these mountains, far from here, making them believe I've fled and abandoned whatever corruption they imagine I planted." Saskia studied him carefully. "You'd lead them away? Put yourself at risk." "I'm already at risk. And I'm faster, stronger, and far older than any of them. I can survive their hunt." His gray eyes held hers. "But I cannot protect this sanctuary and evade them simultaneously. That's why I need you. To be the guardian while I'm the distraction." It was a reasonable plan, Saskia had to admit. But something about it bothered her. What happens after? Once they're gone, will you come back? The question hung in the air between them. Alaric's expression shifted, something vulnerable crossing his features before he controlled it. "Would you want me to?" he asked quietly. Saskia didn't answer immediately. Part of her screamed that no, she didn't want a vampire anywhere near her sanctuary, that this was madness and she should cut all ties the moment the danger passed. But another part, The part that had seen the gentleness in how he touched Freya, the loneliness in his eyes, the honesty in his confession, that part whispered yes. "I don't know," she said finally. "Ask me again when this is over." Alaric nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Now, we should begin preparations. The order will arrive soon, and we need everything in place." For the next several hours, they planned. Alaric described the order's methods. They'd come in small groups, claiming to be wildlife officials or researchers, trying to gain access to the sanctuary. They'd bring equipment designed to detect supernatural corruption, devices that were mostly theatrical but could be convincing to those who wanted to believe. They'd test the wolves, test Saskia herself if they could, looking for any evidence of otherworldly influence. Saskia, in turn, prepared documentation, veterinary records, behavioral studies, genetic profiles of each wolf in her pack. She compiled video footage showing normal pack dynamics, feeding patterns, social hierarchies. Everything that proved her wolves were exactly what they appeared to be. "They'll bring someone who claims to be a supernatural expert," Alaric warned. "Someone who'll point at normal behavior and declare it evidence of corruption. Wolves howling at the moon, yellow eyes reflecting light, aggressive protection of territory, all normal, but they'll spin it as demonic." "Then we need our own expert," Saskia mused. "Someone with scientific credentials who can counter their claims. Do you know anyone?" She thought of Dr. Henrik Voss, her former mentor from the university. He was retired now, but his reputation in wolf conservation was unimpeachable. If she could get him here, his word would carry enormous weight. "I might," she said. "But it would take time to reach him. We have a little time. Make the call." While Saskia contacted Dr. Voss, who, thankfully, was intrigued enough by her vague warning about threats to the sanctuary to agree to come, Alaric prepared for his role as bait. He would leave obvious trails through the mountains, sightings that would draw the order away. But first, he wanted to say goodbye to the pack. They walked back to the enclosure in the pre-dawn darkness. The wolves stirred as they approached, recognizing both of them now. Saskia watched as Alaric knelt by the fence, and Freya approached with several of the other adults. "I've spent many nights running with them," he said softly. "When you were asleep, I'd open this gate and slip inside. They'd surround me, curious, testing. Then Freya, wise Freya, would sniff me carefully and make her judgment. Not threat, not prey, something else. And she'd accept me into their midst, at least temporarily." "You ran with them?" Saskia asked, fascinated despite herself. "I'm fast enough to keep pace." And running with wolves, feeling the pack move as one organism, hunting shadows through the trees. It was the closest I've felt to being alive in decades. He pressed his palm against the fence, and Freya pressed her nose to his hand through the metal. "I will miss them. More than I should." Saskia felt something tighten in her chest. She'd thought herself alone in her devotion to these animals, alone in finding more kinship with wolves than with her own species. But here was something that understood. "When this is over," she said, making a decision, "come back. Not just for them. For me too. I want to understand this better. Understand you better." Alaric turned to look at her, surprise evident in his features. "You'd allow that? After knowing what I am? You're a predator. So are they. So, in my own way, am I." She gestured at the wolves. "We're all just trying to survive in a world that fears what it doesn't control. Maybe that's enough common ground to build on." A slow smile spread across his face, genuine and warm despite the coldness of his skin. "Then I promise I'll return, Saskia Morven. When the hunters are gone and the danger has passed, I'll come back. And perhaps we can learn from each other." The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, the first hints of dawn touching the mountain peaks. Alaric stood abruptly. "I need to go before the sun rises. It won't kill me, despite the myths, but it weakens me considerably. I'll be more vulnerable." He paused. "The order will arrive tomorrow, likely in the afternoon. Be ready. Trust your knowledge and trust the wolves. They'll prove themselves better than any document." "Where will you go?" "North, into the deep mountains. I'll leave a trail a blind man could follow, make sure they see me, then lead them on the chase of their lives." His smile turned predatory. "I haven't had a good hunt in years. This will be entertaining." "Don't get killed," Saskia said, surprising herself with the concern in her voice. "I don't intend to. I have promises to keep now." He reached out and, with surprising gentleness, brushed a strand of hair from her face. His cold fingers lingered for just a moment. "Stay safe, Wolf Whisperer. Protect them. I'll return when I can." Then he was gone, moving with impossible speed, a shadow that merged with the retreating darkness. Saskia stood alone by the enclosure, the wolves settling back to sleep as dawn broke over the mountains, and wondered what she'd just agreed to. Dr. Henrik Voss arrived the following afternoon, a tall, weathered man in his 70s with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He'd been Saskia's mentor during her graduate studies, the one who'd recognized her unique talent with wolves and encouraged her to pursue field work rather than academic research. He'd helped her secure funding for the sanctuary 5 years ago, and she trusted him completely. "Saskia," he greeted her with a warm embrace. "You sounded worried on the phone. What's happening here?" She told him an edited version of the truth, that a group calling themselves wildlife investigators were coming, claiming her wolves showed signs of disease or abnormal behavior, that they intended to conduct tests and possibly recommend the pack be destroyed. She left out the parts about vampires and supernatural hunters. Henrik was a man of science, and that conversation could wait. "Ridiculous," Henrik snorted. "I've seen your documentation. These wolves are textbook examples of healthy pack dynamics. What's their real agenda?" "I think they're animal rights extremists," Saskia lied, hating the deception but seeing no alternative. "The kind who believe all captive animals should be released, regardless of whether they can survive in the wild. They want to shut down rehabilitation centers like mine." Henrik's expression hardened. "Then they'll have to go through me. I still have considerable influence in conservation circles. Let them try to discredit your work." They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. Henrik reviewed all of Saskia's records, watched hours of behavioral footage, even spent time observing the pack directly. His conclusion was exactly what she expected. The wolves were healthy, well-adjusted, showing normal pack behavior with no signs of distress or abnormality. "Whatever these people claim," he said firmly, "I'll counter it. Your sanctuary is a model facility, Saskia. Don't let zealots destroy what you've built." The order arrived just before sunset, exactly as Alaric had predicted. 4 vehicles pulled up the long dirt road to the sanctuary, and Saskia's stomach tightened as she watched 7 people emerge. They looked professional, official, carrying equipment cases and clipboards. But their eyes, Saskia saw the zealotry there, the certainty that brooked no argument. A woman in her 50s approached first, extending her hand. "Ms. Morven, I'm Dr. Catherine Wells from the European Wildlife Protection Agency. We've received concerning reports about your facility and need to conduct an inspection." Saskia shook her hand, noting the coldness of the grip. "I'm not aware of any reports. My sanctuary is properly licensed and inspected regularly. Nevertheless, we have protocols to follow. May we enter?" Henrik stepped forward. "Dr. Henrik Voss, University of Oslo, Department of Wildlife Biology. I'm Ms. Morven's advisor and have been reviewing her facility myself. Perhaps you could share these concerning reports you mention? I'd like to see the specific allegations." Dr. Wells's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. Though I think it's better if we discuss this inside, away from the animals. They may be sensitive to our presence." They moved to Saskia's cabin. Once inside, Dr. Wells produced a folder thick with documents. Saskia's heart sank as she skimmed through them. Testimonies from locals about demon wolves with glowing eyes, unnatural howling, strange figures seen entering the sanctuary at night. There were even photographs, grainy and unclear, showing what could be interpreted as anything but which Wells claimed showed evidence of supernatural corruption. "This is absurd," Henrik said immediately. "These are the ravings of superstitious locals, not scientific evidence. Wolves' eyes reflect light, tapetum lucidum, a normal anatomical feature. They howl to communicate, again, completely normal. And strange figures? In rural areas where people aren't used to nighttime wildlife activity. We simply want to verify, Wells said smoothly. Conduct a few tests, observe the animals, ensure they pose no threat to the surrounding communities. What kind of tests? Saskia asked, though she dreaded the answer. One of the men, who introduced himself as Father Marcus, spoke up. He wore priest's clothes, but his bearing was more soldier than clergyman. Behavioral tests. Response to various stimuli. Blood samples. We need to ensure these animals haven't been altered in any way. Altered? Henrik's voice rose. What are you suggesting? That someone's performed genetic experiments? This isn't a laboratory, it's a rehabilitation center for wild wolves. We're not suggesting anything, Wells said. Merely being thorough. Surely you understand the importance of public safety. The conversation continued for another hour, circling and parrying. Wells and her team were skilled at couching their supernatural beliefs in language that sounded scientific enough to be plausible. They wanted to test the wolves' reactions to silver, to holy water, to symbols they claimed were traditional wildlife deterrents. They wanted to examine the wolves at night, during their most active period, which Saskia knew meant when they expected to find evidence of supernatural behavior. Henrik fought them at every turn, demanding scientific justification, threatening to report them to actual wildlife agencies. But Wells had documents, official-looking credentials, and the implicit threat of legal action if Saskia didn't cooperate. Fine, Saskia said finally, exhausted. You can observe the wolves. But no invasive tests without proper veterinary oversight. No unauthorized handling. And Dr. Voss will be present for everything. Of course, Wells agreed, that cold smile never wavering. We simply want the truth, Ms. Morven. Whatever that truth may be. As the Order members set up their equipment outside, devices that Saskia suspected had more to do with detecting supernatural energy than actual wildlife monitoring, she pulled Henrik aside. There's something I haven't told you, she said quietly. This isn't really about animal rights or even legitimate wildlife concerns. I'd gathered that, Henrik said dryly. These people are fanatics. But fanatics about what, exactly? Saskia took a breath and made a decision. Henrik deserved the truth, no matter how strange. They're hunting something they believe is supernatural. They think my wolves have been corrupted by a vampire. Henrik stared at her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he didn't laugh. His expression grew serious. Are you telling me you've encountered something unusual here? I'm telling you that someone unusual has been protecting this sanctuary. Someone who the wolves accept and trust. Someone these fanatics want to destroy along with everything he's touched. She met Henrik's eyes. I know how it sounds. But I've seen things in the past 2 days that I can't explain with science. And whatever he is, he's not a threat to my wolves or to me. These people are. Henrik was quiet for a long time, looking out the window at where the Order was setting up lights around the wolf enclosure. When you're my age, he said finally, you learn that the world is stranger than any textbook admits. I've seen things in the wilderness, Saskia, things I've never reported because no one would believe me. Lights in the forest with no source. Animals behaving in ways that defied every behavioral model. Sounds that shouldn't exist. He turned back to her. I don't know if I believe in vampires. But I believe you. And I believe these wolves are healthy, normal animals who don't deserve to be destroyed by zealots. So we'll play their game, prove your wolves are exactly what they appear to be, and send these people packing. Agreed. Relief flooded through Saskia. Agreed. Thank you, Henrik. Thank me by staying sharp. These people are dangerous, regardless of what they believe they're hunting. That night, the testing began. Wells and her team set up cameras, EMF detectors, and various other devices around the wolf enclosure. They wanted to observe the pack's nighttime behavior, looking for anything they could interpret as abnormal. Saskia and Henrik watched from the observation deck, ready to intervene if anyone tried to enter the enclosure or disturb the wolves. The pack, for their part, behaved perfectly normally. They interacted, played, established sleeping positions based on their hierarchy. Freya maintained her position as alpha, keeping order with subtle body language and occasional disciplinary nips. There was nothing remotely supernatural about their behavior. But Father Marcus pointed anyway. See how the alpha watches us. How they all seem aware of our presence. That's more than normal animal wariness. That's called intelligence, Henrik countered. Wolves are highly aware of their environment. They've noticed strange humans setting up equipment around their territory. Of course they're watching. It would be abnormal if they weren't. Wells made notes but said nothing. Saskia could see the woman's frustration growing as hour after hour passed with nothing unusual occurring. The wolves slept, woke, moved around. Entirely normal nocturnal activity. Then, around midnight, something changed. Freya stood suddenly, ears pricked forward, staring into the dark forest beyond the northern fence. The other wolves rose too, all facing the same direction, bodies tense. A low rumble of warning growls rippled through the pack. There, Marcus said triumphantly. They sense something. Something unnatural. Saskia's heart raced. She knew what they sensed. Alaric was out there, making himself known to the wolves even as he remained hidden from the humans. It was part of their plan. He'd draw the Order's attention, make them believe he was close enough to catch. They sense a predator, Henrik said. Probably a bear or mountain lion passing through. This is wild country. There are many large predators. But the Order wasn't buying it. Wells grabbed a powerful spotlight and swept it across the tree line. For just a moment, the beam caught movement. Something fast, bipedal, there and gone in an instant. Did you see that? Marcus demanded. Did you see it? I saw something moving, Saskia said carefully. Could have been a person. These mountains aren't entirely empty. There are hikers, hunters. At midnight. Wells's voice was sharp. Running at that speed? The wolves had begun howling now, a chorus that echoed across the valley. It was beautiful and eerie, an ancient sound that raised the hair on Saskia's arms. She knew they were calling to Alaric, communicating in ways humans couldn't fully understand. Vocalizing to warn off a potential threat, Henrik explained. Standard territorial behavior. But the Order had seen enough. Wells began giving orders, directing her team to gear up. He's close. We can't let him slip away again. Father Marcus, Sister Elena, you're with me. The rest of you, maintain surveillance on the wolves. If they show any sign of transformation or supernatural influence, document everything. You can't just leave your posts, Henrik protested. This is still private property, and you have no authority to. We have all the authority we need, Wells cut him off coldly. She pulled out a document with official seals. Emergency Wildlife Threat Protocol, signed by regional authorities. If we determine there's an imminent supernatural danger, we're authorized to neutralize it by any means necessary. Saskia felt ice in her veins. The document looked legitimate, which meant the Order had connections high enough to manufacture legal cover for their hunt. They weren't just zealots, they were organized, funded, and protected zealots. I'm coming with you, Saskia said suddenly. Wells turned, surprised. Absolutely not. This could be dangerous. These are my mountains. I know every trail, every cave, every place someone could hide. You'll get lost out there in the dark without a guide. Saskia crossed her arms. Besides, if you're chasing some imaginary threat away from my sanctuary, I want to make sure you're not just planning to circle back and harm my wolves while I'm not looking. Wells considered this, then nodded curtly. Fine. But you follow our lead and stay back if we encounter the target. Understood. Understood. Henrik grabbed Saskia's arm as she prepared to leave. This is madness. You don't know what they'll do out there, away from witnesses. I know, Saskia whispered. But Alaric needs someone to make sure they stay on his trail, away from here. And I need to make sure they don't actually catch him. She squeezed Henrik's hand. "Watch the wolves. Don't let the others do anything to them. I'll be back before dawn." "Be careful," Henrik said, his eyes full of worry. "I've already lost too many good students to reckless bravery." "I'm not being brave. I'm being practical." She managed a small smile. "Wolves taught me that sometimes you have to lead the threat away from the pack." The forest at night was a different world. Saskia had hiked these trails countless times, but never quite like this, following armed zealots chasing a vampire through the darkness. Wells, Marcus, and a woman introduced as Sister Elena moved with military precision, using night vision equipment and thermal imaging to track their prey. Alaric was leaving a trail, just as he'd promised. Broken branches, disturbed earth, even what looked like drops of blood on the rocks. It was almost too obvious, and Saskia wondered if the Order realized they were being led. But zealotry made people see what they wanted to see, and Wells seemed convinced they were closing in on their target. "How long have you been hunting him?" Saskia asked as they climbed a steep ridge. 3 months actively," Wells replied, not taking her eyes off the trail. "But the Order has been aware of this particular vampire for much longer. He's old, powerful, and dangerous. He's left a trail of bodies across Europe stretching back centuries." "Bodies?" Saskia kept her voice neutral. "What kind of bodies?" "His victims. People drained of blood, left like empty shells." Marcus's voice was hard with righteous anger. "He's a monster, Ms. Morven. Whatever facade he might present, whatever lies he might tell, he's a killer. It's his nature." Saskia thought of Alaric kneeling by the wolf enclosure, the gentleness in his touch, the loneliness in his eyes. She thought of him saying he'd learned control, that he only fed from the willing. But she also remembered his admission, "I've killed when anger or desperation drove me to darkness." "And your Order has never killed innocents?" she asked quietly. "Never made mistakes?" Sister Elena spoke for the first time, her voice carrying a slight accent. Russian, Saskia thought. "We are human. We make mistakes. But we serve a higher purpose, protecting humanity from supernatural threats. Sometimes that requires difficult choices. Like killing wolves you think are corrupted?" "If necessary, yes." Elena's eyes met Saskia's in the darkness. "You love your wolves. We understand that. But love can blind us to danger. If that vampire has touched them, changed them in ways you cannot see, they become a threat. A vector for spreading corruption." "That's not how anything works," Saskia argued. "You can't just corrupt an animal like it's a computer virus. Wolves are wolves, vampires are vampires. They're different species entirely." "You think in scientific terms," Wells said. "But the supernatural doesn't follow your scientific laws. We've seen things you couldn't imagine, Ms. Morven. Animals twisted by dark magic. Creatures that wear the skin of normal beasts but harbor demonic essence. Your education didn't prepare you for these realities." Saskia bit back a sharp retort. Arguing would only make them suspicious. Instead, she focused on guiding them along the trail, watching for signs of Alaric while pretending to be their reluctant assistant. They'd been hiking for over an hour when they reached a narrow canyon with steep rock walls. The trail led inside, and Saskia felt a spike of worry. This was the kind of place where Alaric could be trapped if the Order was smarter than he anticipated. "He went in there," Marcus said, checking his thermal scanner. "The canyon's a dead end. We have him." "Or it's a trap," Elena warned. "He's been leading us. This could be where he makes his stand." Wells considered, then smiled coldly. "Good. I'm tired of chasing. Let's finish this." She turned to Saskia. "You stay here. Guard the entrance. If he tries to escape past you, fire this into the air." She handed Saskia a flare gun. "We'll hear it and cut him off." Saskia took the flare gun, relief flooding through her. They were leaving her behind, which meant she might be able to warn Alaric. "Be careful in there. These canyons can be treacherous." "We know what we're doing," Wells said. Then the three of them disappeared into the darkness of the canyon, weapons drawn, moving like hunters who'd done this many times before. The moment they were out of sight, Saskia ran to the canyon entrance. "Alaric!" she hissed into the darkness. "Alaric, it's a trap. They think they have you cornered." Silence answered her. Then, from somewhere above, a voice. "I know. That's the point." Saskia looked up and saw him perched on a rock outcropping 20 feet above the canyon floor, perfectly balanced, his coat billowing in the mountain wind. In the moonlight, he looked like something from a Gothic painting, beautiful, terrible, and utterly inhuman. "What are you doing?" she whispered urgently. "They have weapons, Alaric. Silver bullets, probably. Things that can actually hurt you. I'm doing what I promised, leading them away from your sanctuary." He dropped from the outcropping, landing with impossible grace beside her. "But I'm also teaching them a lesson. They need to understand that I'm not prey to be cornered." "You're going to fight them? Kill them?" "No." His expression was serious. "I'm going to terrify them. Show them exactly what they're hunting, make them understand the danger, then vanish. They'll retreat, regroup, and hopefully decide this particular vampire isn't worth the cost of pursuing. And if they don't? If they just come back with more hunters?" Alaric's hand came up to cup her cheek, his cold touch somehow comforting. "Then I'll deal with that too. But I won't let them harm you or your wolves, Saskia. I promise you that." Before she could respond, shots rang out from within the canyon. Not bullets, something else. Saskia heard sizzling sounds, saw flashes of light reflecting off the rock walls. "Blessed rounds and sanctified explosives," Alaric said, almost conversationally. "They're trying to flush me out. Dramatic, but ineffective." He leaned in close, his lips near her ear. "Go back to the entrance. When you see me leave, count to 30, then fire the flare. Make them think you tried to signal them, but I was too fast. Can you do that?" "Yes, but—" "Trust me, Wolf Whisperer. I've survived far worse than 3 zealots with blessed bullets." His smile was sharp, predatory. "Now watch a vampire hunt." He vanished into the canyon, moving with speed that made him almost invisible. Saskia ran back to the entrance, her heart pounding. She heard shouts, more gunfire, the sound of rock cracking. Then a scream, not of pain, but of pure terror. A figure burst from the canyon entrance running at full speed. Sister Elena, her face pale with shock, her weapon forgotten. She didn't even see Saskia as she ran past, heading back down the mountain trail like demons pursued her. Moments later, Marcus emerged, dragging Wells with him. The older woman's leg was bleeding, and her expression was one of shock and rage mixed together. Marcus's face was grim. "What happened?" Saskia called out, running toward them. "That thing." Wells gasped. "He's not just a vampire. He's ancient. Powerful. He moved like death itself." "We shot him," Marcus said, his voice shaking slightly. "Hit him 3 times with blessed rounds. He just laughed. Pulled them out and healed before our eyes. Then he swallowed hard. He showed us what he really is. His true face. I've seen many creatures, but nothing like that." "We need to retreat," Wells said, wincing as Marcus helped her walk. "Regroup. This target requires a full tactical team, not a scouting party." Saskia watched them limp away, then turned back to the canyon. Alaric stood at the entrance, perfectly unharmed, watching the hunters retreat. His expression was satisfied. "You didn't kill them," Saskia observed, relief and something else, admiration perhaps, in her voice. "I told you I wouldn't. I simply reminded them why their ancestors feared the night." He walked toward her, his movements once again fluid and graceful rather than threatening. "They'll leave your sanctuary alone now. They know I'm not hiding there, that I'm not tied to it in any way they can exploit. And they know that hunting me directly is more dangerous than they're prepared for." Wells said, "You're ancient. That you've left bodies across Europe for centuries." Alaric didn't deny it. "I have. I won't lie about my past, Saskia. I've been a monster more times than I can count. But I've also been trying, for the last century at least, to be something better. To find purpose beyond mere survival. He looked toward the mountains, where dawn was still hours away. Your sanctuary gave me that purpose. The wolves accepted me not as a threat, but as another creature of the night. That acceptance, it mattered. Saskia studied him carefully. This was the moment, she realized. The moment where she decided whether to truly trust this creature, or to thank him and send him away forever. Every rational part of her said she should choose the latter. But rationality had never been her strongest suit where wolves, or apparently vampires, were concerned. Come back to the sanctuary, she said. Just for tonight. Henrik will have questions, and you owe me the full truth about what you are and what you want. Are you sure? Your mentor may not react well to meeting an actual vampire. Henrik's seen stranger things than he admits, and he trusts my judgment. She started walking back down the trail. Besides, the wolves will be restless after all that commotion. They'll want to know you're safe. Alaric fell into step beside her, and they walked through the darkness together. Behind them, the Order was retreating down the mountain, their hunt unsuccessful. Ahead lay the sanctuary, the wolves, and conversations that would change everything. Tell me something, Saskia said as they walked. When you said the wolves accepted you, gave you purpose, was that true? Or were you just manipulating me to gain an ally? It was true. His voice was quiet, sincere. I've been alone for so long, Saskia. Watching humans live and love and die, always apart from it, always the predator observing the herd. But your wolves, they didn't see me as predator or prey. They saw me as something like themselves. Another creature that hunts, that understands the night, that exists outside human civilization. For the first time in decades, I felt like I belonged somewhere. And me? How do you see me? He was quiet for a long moment. I see someone who chose wolves over people because they're honest. Someone who built a sanctuary not just for them, but for herself. Someone who understands loneliness but fights against it by protecting others. He glanced at her. I see a kindred spirit, if a vampire can claim such a thing. Saskia felt warmth spread through her chest despite the cold mountain air. I think vampires can claim whatever they want, as long as they're honest about it. Then I'll be honest. I don't want to leave. Not just tonight, but at all. I know it's dangerous. I know it complicates your work, but I'd like to stay. Help protect the sanctuary. Run with the wolves. Perhaps get to know you better. That's very honest. Is it too honest? Saskia smiled. Ask me again when we get back. After you meet Henrik, and don't accidentally terrify him into a heart attack. The sanctuary was quiet when they returned, the wolves settled but watchful. Henrik stood on the observation deck, relief crossing his face when he saw Saskia approach. Then he noticed her companion, and his expression shifted to wary curiosity. Henrik, Saskia called out. This is Alaric Thorne. He's the reason the Order came here, and the reason they just left. We need to talk. Henrik descended from the deck, studying Alaric with the same careful attention he gave to any new specimen. You're the vampire they were hunting. It wasn't a question. Alaric inclined his head. I am. And you're taking that revelation remarkably well, Dr. Voss. When you've spent 50 years studying animals in remote wilderness areas, you learn that the world holds more mysteries than textbooks acknowledge. Henrik crossed his arms. I've suspected for years that something unusual lived in these mountains. The locals have too many consistent stories about shadow figures that run with wolves. I just didn't know it was, well, you. The locals, Alaric said with a slight smile, have excellent instincts. I've been less careful about hiding my presence than I should have been. Why here? Henrik asked. Why this sanctuary specifically? Because of her. Alaric gestured toward Saskia. Because she built something rare, a place where predators are understood rather than feared. Where wolves can heal from human cruelty and remember what they are. As a predator myself, exiled from human society, I found that appealing. Henrik's sharp eyes moved between Alaric and Saskia. And now, the Order has retreated, but they know you exist. They'll be back, possibly with greater force. I know. Which is why I need to disappear more completely. Make them believe I've left this region entirely. Alaric's expression grew serious. But I want to return when it's safe. With your permission, and Saskia's, I'd like to make this sanctuary my home. My permission? Henrik raised an eyebrow. I don't own this place. No, but Saskia respects you. Your approval matters. Alaric met the older man's gaze steadily. I'm not asking for immediate trust. I know what I am, what I've been. But I'm offering my protection, my knowledge, and my commitment to helping preserve what you've both worked to build here. Henrik was silent for a long moment, thinking. Then he looked at the wolf enclosure, where Freya had risen and was watching their conversation with interest. What do the wolves think? They accept him, Saskia said. Completely. Freya treats him like an allied pack, maybe. Not part of our pack, but not a threat either. Something that can be trusted to respect boundaries. Animals have better instincts about character than humans do, Henrik mused. Very well. I won't oppose this, though I think you're both insane. But Saskia, you need to understand the risks. Not just from the Order, but from associating with someone whose nature is fundamentally predatory. I work with predators every day, Saskia pointed out. At least Alaric can explain his behavior in words. Fair point. Henrik sighed. I'm too old for this level of strangeness, but I suppose that's what I get for mentoring someone as stubborn as you. He extended his hand to Alaric. Welcome to the sanctuary, Mr. Thorne. Try not to eat anyone. Alaric shook his hand, genuine amusement in his expression. I'll do my best, Dr. Voss. They moved inside the cabin, and over the next several hours, Alaric told them everything. His history. Born in 1613 in Prague, turned into a vampire during the 30 Years' War by a creature he never saw clearly. His centuries of wandering, the wars he'd witnessed, the changes in human civilization he'd observed. The good he'd tried to do, protecting innocents during various conflicts, using his abilities to stop worse monsters. And the evil he'd committed, the people he'd killed, either from hunger or anger or simple indifference to human life. I'm not a hero, he said quietly. I don't want you to think I'm some romantic figure from a story. I've done terrible things. Taken lives I can never restore. I'm capable of violence and cruelty when provoked. But you've also spent decades trying to be better, Saskia said. That has to count for something. Does it? Can centuries of trying to atone ever balance centuries of sin? I don't know, Saskia admitted. But I know that the person sitting here right now, the one who protected my wolves and led hunters away from my sanctuary, that person is trying. And that's enough for me to work with. Henrik had been quiet during most of Alaric's confession, but now he spoke up. You said you're old, that you've seen civilizations rise and fall. Tell me, have you encountered other supernatural beings? Other creatures that might threaten this sanctuary? Yes, Alaric said. Werewolves, though they're much rarer than stories suggest. Witches, though most are simply humans with unusual talents rather than pact-makers with demons. Spirits of various kinds, especially in old forests. And other vampires, though we tend to be solitary and avoid each other. And all of these could potentially target this place? Some might. The supernatural world has its own politics, territories, feuds. By making this sanctuary my home, I'd be claiming it as under my protection. That would deter most threats, but could attract challenges from those who want to test an old vampire's strength. So Saskia wouldn't just be harboring you, Henrik said. She'd be entering your world, taking on all the dangers that come with it. Yes. Alaric looked at Saskia directly. Which is why I'll understand if you refuse. I can leave, disappear so completely that no one will ever connect me to this place. You'd be safe, your wolves would be safe, and you could continue your work without supernatural complications. Saskia stood and walked to the window. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The wolves were stirring, beginning their morning routines. Freya stretched and yawned, then padded over to check on her pack members with the calm authority of a good leader. This was her life's work. These wolves, this sanctuary, the fragile peace she'd built in this wild place. Alaric was right. Letting him stay would complicate everything, bring dangers she'd never anticipated. The smart choice, the safe choice, was to send him away. But Saskia had never been good at safe choices. "The wolves trust you," she said, not turning from the window. "That's not something they give easily. They've been hurt by humans, betrayed, traumatized. But they accepted you. That tells me something important about who you are beneath the predator." She turned to face him. "Stay. Help me protect this place. Teach me about your world, and I'll teach you more about theirs. We'll figure out how to manage the dangers together." Alaric's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on something that looked like profound relief. "Thank you. You won't regret this, I promise." "Oh, I'll probably regret it," Saskia said with a slight smile. "But I'll regret it while doing something meaningful, which is better than playing it safe." Henrik shook his head, but he was smiling too. "You two deserve each other. I'm going back to Oslo before I get dragged any deeper into this insanity. But Saskia, call me if you need anything. Anything at all. Even if it's just someone to remind you that normal academic careers exist." "I will. Thank you, Henrik, for everything." After Henrik left, promising to handle any official inquiries about the Order's visit, Saskia and Alaric stood together on the observation deck, watching the wolves begin their day. The sun was fully up now, and Alaric had pulled on a heavy hooded coat to protect himself from its weakening effects. "I should rest," he said. "Daylight drains me, even when I'm covered. But tonight, may I run with them again? With you watching, this time." "I'd like that," Saskia said. "I want to see what they see in you. Understand this connection you've built." "Then tonight." He touched her hand briefly, his cold fingers gentle. "Rest well, Saskia Morven. Dream of wolves and shadows." He disappeared into the cabin's basement, a storage area he'd apparently been using as a daytime shelter for months without her knowledge. Saskia stood alone on the deck, watching her pack and wondering what she'd just agreed to. A partnership with a vampire. Protection from supernatural threats she'd never known existed. A chance to understand the deeper mysteries of the wild world she'd devoted her life to studying. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something that might have been excitement. For the next several weeks, life at the sanctuary took on a new rhythm. During the day, Saskia managed the wolves' care, maintained the facilities, and handled the administrative work of running a conservation center. She'd installed additional security after the Order's visit, cameras and motion sensors that would alert her to any future intrusions. But at night, when the moon rose and the wolves became active, Alaric emerged from his shelter and joined her. At first, he simply observed, standing with her on the deck while she explained wolf behavior, pack dynamics, individual personalities. He listened with the intense focus of someone who'd spent centuries learning to survive by understanding the world around him. "Freya's authority isn't about dominance through violence," Saskia explained one evening. "It's about confidence, consistency, and making good decisions for the pack. She settles disputes, leads hunts, decides when the pack moves or rests. The others follow because they trust her judgment." "Like you," Alaric observed. "They trust you because you've proven yourself trustworthy, not because you force compliance." "Exactly. Real leadership is earned, not demanded." Gradually, Alaric began entering the enclosure with her, his presence becoming familiar to the wolves. They would approach him cautiously at first, testing his scent, reading his body language. But night after night, their acceptance grew. Even the more timid wolves, the ones who'd been most damaged by human cruelty, began to trust him. "They know you're a predator," Saskia said, watching a young gray named Storm tentatively sniff Alaric's hand. "But they also know you're not hunting them. You're just existing in the same space." I'm showing submission, Alaric explained. Not in the way humans think of it, but in the way predators communicate. I'm telling them I respect their territory, that I'm not challenging their hierarchy. I'm asking permission to be here. And they're granting it. Because you granted it first. I'm an extension of your pack from their perspective. They trust me because they trust you. One night, 3 weeks after the Order's retreat, Alaric asked if he could try something. I want to run with them. Really run, the way I used to before you knew about me. Will you open the gate? Saskia hesitated. The sanctuary's fence kept the wolves safe from the outside world, but it also kept them contained. She'd never released them for a free run before. The risk of them not returning or encountering dangers beyond the fence was too high. They'll come back, Alaric assured her. I'll make sure of it. And you can follow on the ATV, watch everything that happens. If even one wolf gets hurt, then you can stake me yourself. His smile was gentle. Trust me, Saskia. Trust them. They need this. They need to remember what it feels like to run truly free, even if just for a few hours. Against her better judgment, she was making a habit of that lately, Saskia agreed. She opened the main gate as dusk fell, and the wolves poured out into the wider wilderness, Freya leading them with joyous bounds. Alaric ran with them, his vampire speed allowing him to keep pace even with the swiftest wolves. Saskia followed on the ATV, her heart in her throat, watching her pack experience freedom they'd never known under her care. They ran for miles through the mountain forest, Alaric sometimes leading, sometimes following, always moving as part of the pack rather than separate from it. The wolves played, chased each other, howled at the rising moon. And gradually, Saskia understood what Alaric had tried to explain. They needed this. All her careful rehabilitation work, all her structured care and feeding schedules, couldn't replace the simple joy of running wild under an open sky. After 2 hours, Alaric led them back to the sanctuary. Every wolf returned, tired and happy, tongues lolling in satisfied grins. They filed back through the gate, and Saskia locked it behind them with trembling hands. You see, Alaric said, only slightly winded. They're not prisoners here. They're choosing to stay because this is their territory, their home. But now they know they can leave if they want to. That changes everything. He was right. Over the following days, Saskia noticed differences in the pack's behavior. They were calmer, more confident, less likely to show stress behaviors. They'd experienced real freedom and chosen to return. That choice had healed something in them that all her rehabilitation work hadn't quite reached. I've been too protective, she admitted one night. Treating them like they need constant management rather than trusting them to make their own decisions. You were protecting them, Alaric said gently. That's your nature, just as hunting is mine. But maybe we can balance each other. Your care and my understanding of wildness. A vampire teaching me about wildness. That's ironic. Is it? I've lived outside civilization for 4 centuries. I've had to embrace my predator nature while maintaining enough humanity to survive. I understand the balance between wild and civilized better than most. They were sitting on the cabin's porch, watching the pack settle in for the night. Saskia had become comfortable with Alaric's presence, no longer startling when he moved within human speed or when his eyes caught the light and reflected like an animal's. She'd learned to read his moods, to understand when he needed space and when he sought companionship. Tell me about feeding, she said suddenly. You said you only feed from the willing. How does that work? Alaric was quiet for a moment. I visit cities, usually. Find people who are curious about vampires, who fantasize about the danger and romance of it. I'm careful, selective. I take only what I need, and I make sure they remember it as a pleasurable encounter rather than an assault. Most think they've had a vivid dream. And that's enough? You don't need to kill. No. Killing was never necessary, just easier, more satisfying to the predator inside me. But I learned control over the decades. Learned to take pleasure in restraint rather than in excess. When will you need to feed again? In a few days. I'll travel to Bucharest, be gone perhaps 2 nights. He glanced at her. "Will you be all right alone here?" "I've been alone for years, Alaric. I'll manage." She paused. "Though I'll miss having someone to talk to at night. The wolves are wonderful, but the conversation is limited." He smiled. "I'll miss them too. And you." The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither was quite ready to address. Saskia knew she was growing attached to this vampire, this creature who should have been her enemy but had become something else. She knew it was dangerous, that her feelings were complicating an already complex situation. But wolves had taught her that some bonds transcended logic. That sometimes, connection happened despite every rational reason against it. "Alaric," she said softly, "what are we doing here? Whatever this is between us." He turned to look at her fully, his gray eyes serious. "I don't know. I've lived centuries, Saskia, and I've never felt quite like this. I've had lovers, companions, brief connections that faded when they died and I remained. But you make me want to stop wandering. You make me want to build something permanent for the first time since I became this thing." "I scare you," she realized. "Terrify me," he admitted. "Because caring about someone when you're immortal means watching them age and die while you stay the same. It means inevitable loss, pain I've learned to avoid by never letting anyone matter too much. So what do we do? What the wolves taught us, we choose. Despite the danger, despite the inevitable end, we choose the connection. We run together while we can and trust that the joy is worth the eventual sorrow." Saskia reached out and took his cold hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Then let's run together. However long it lasts." Alaric lifted her hand and pressed it to his lips, a gesture from another century that somehow felt perfect. "However long it lasts." Part 7. Shadow's Return. The peace lasted 3 months. 3 perfect months of nights running with wolves, days learning to navigate this strange new relationship with a vampire, and slowly building something that felt like hope. Saskia had never been happier, had never felt more connected to both her work and another person. Then the Order returned. It started with strange sightings in the nearby village. Tourists who claimed to be wildlife photographers, asking pointed questions about the sanctuary. Equipment deliveries for research purposes that seemed far too military for civilian use. Locals being questioned about unusual activity in the mountains. Alaric noticed first. He'd been monitoring the village carefully, keeping track of any signs that the Order might return. "They're building something," he told Saskia one night. "A forward base, about 15 miles from here. More hunters, more equipment. This time they're not coming to scout. They're coming to end this." "End what?" "We proved the wolves are normal. You led them away. What more do they want?" "Revenge," Alaric said grimly. "I humiliated them, embarrassed their order by showing how ineffective their holy weapons were. And they've had 3 months to study me, to learn from their failure, to develop new tactics. So we fight. No. We protect." He gripped her shoulders gently. "Saskia, they're coming for me, but they'll go through your wolves to draw me out. We need to evacuate the pack, move them somewhere safe until this is resolved." "Move them where? This is their home." "I know. But better displaced temporarily than dead." His expression was pained. "I should never have stayed. I brought this danger to your doorstep." "Don't," Saskia said fiercely. "Don't you dare blame yourself for this. Those fanatics are responsible for their own actions, not you. We'll figure this out together." They spent the next 2 days planning. Henrik arranged for a temporary relocation to another sanctuary 300 miles away, run by a colleague who owed him favors. Saskia began the stressful work of preparing the wolves for transport, sedation, crating, ensuring they'd survive the journey without too much trauma. But they ran out of time. The Order attacked at dawn, when Alaric was at his weakest. They came with trucks, weapons, and what looked like military tactical gear. Wells led them, her expression hard and determined. Behind her were at least 20 hunters, far more than the scouting party they'd sent before. "Saskia Morven," Wells's voice boomed through a loudspeaker. This facility is now under the jurisdiction of Emergency Supernatural Threat Response. Evacuate immediately or be considered hostile. Saskia stood on the cabin porch, fury and fear warring inside her. You have no authority here. This is private property. Your property is harboring a Class 5 supernatural threat. We have all the authority we need. Wells gestured, and several hunters began approaching the wolf enclosure with what looked like tranquilizer guns. The corrupted animals will be euthanized. The vampire will be captured and neutralized. You can cooperate or be arrested for obstruction. Alaric! Saskia shouted toward the cabin. Stay inside. Don't come out. But she knew he would. She knew he wouldn't let the wolves be hurt, wouldn't let her face this alone. And the Order knew it too. They were counting on it. The cabin door opened, and Alaric stepped out into the morning sunlight. Even with the heavy coat and hood protecting him, Saskia could see him struggling against the sun's weakening effects. His skin had taken on an almost translucent quality, and his movements, usually so fluid, were slower, more labored. "Let her go," he called out, his voice still strong despite his weakened state. "Your quarrel is with me, not with her or the wolves. I'll surrender myself if you leave them in peace." Wells smiled, but it was a predator's smile. "How noble. But we both know you won't actually surrender. You'll fight, will be forced to use lethal measures, and in the chaos, accidents might happen. Stray bullets might hit enclosures. Fires might start. Such unfortunate collateral damage." "You're monsters," Saskia spat. "You're worse than anything you hunt." "We do what's necessary," Marcus said, emerging from one of the trucks with a device that looked like a modified flamethrower. "God's work isn't always clean." That's when the howling started. Every wolf in the sanctuary began vocalizing at once, a chorus that echoed across the valley with primal power. It wasn't the fearful yipping of trapped animals. It was a declaration, a challenge, a call to something ancient that humans had learned to fear millennia ago. And from the surrounding forest, more howls answered. Wells's confident expression flickered with confusion. "What is that? There shouldn't be wild packs this close to." They emerged from the tree line like shadows given form. Wild wolves, dozens of them, packs from across the mountain region drawn by some call that transcended normal communication. They didn't attack, didn't even growl. They simply surrounded the Order's forces, a living barrier of fur and teeth and ancient knowing. "Impossible," Elena breathed. "Wild wolves don't cooperate like this. Different packs don't form alliances." "They do when something threatens all of them," Alaric said, and despite his weakness, there was satisfaction in his voice. "You're not just threatening this sanctuary, you're threatening the entire ecosystem. The wolves know it. They've come to defend their territory." Saskia stared in amazement. She'd never seen anything like this, wild packs working together, coordinating without any apparent signal. It defied everything she'd been taught about wolf behavior. Unless... She looked at Alaric and understood. Somehow, during those months of running with her pack, he'd connected with the wild wolves too. Had spread that same acceptance, that same message of being something between predator and ally. And now they were answering his unspoken call for help. "We can still take them," Marcus said, raising his weapon. "Wolves are just animals, blessed rounds or not." "Fire on them and you prove you're not here for protection," Alaric said coldly. "You're here for slaughter. Even your superiors won't be able to justify wholesale massacre of endangered species on foreign soil." Wells's face twisted with frustration. She knew he was right. Killing one vampire could be justified as necessary action. Killing dozens of protected wild wolves would be an international incident, would bring scrutiny the Order couldn't withstand. "This isn't over," she said finally. "We'll be back with proper authorization, with governmental support. You can't hide behind animals forever." "Perhaps not," Alaric agreed. "But by the time you navigate bureaucracy and politics, I'll be long gone from this region. The sanctuary will be clean, beyond reproach. You'll have nothing to justify your crusade." It was a bluff, Saskia could see that Alaric had no intention of leaving, but Wells couldn't know that. The Order leader stared at him for a long moment, then gestured sharply to her team. "Fall back. We'll reassess and return with proper authority." She pointed at Saskia. "You're making a terrible mistake, Ms. Morven. That creature will destroy everything you love eventually. It's their nature." "I'll take my chances," Saskia replied. The Order retreated to their trucks and left, the wild wolves tracking their departure with unwavering attention. Only when the vehicles disappeared down the mountain road did the wild packs begin to disperse, melting back into the forest as mysteriously as they'd appeared. Alaric collapsed. Saskia ran to him as he fell to his knees, the sun finally overwhelming his weakened resistance. She pulled him into the cabin's shade, horrified by how cold his skin had become, how shallow his breathing. "I'm all right," he managed. "Just need darkness. Rest." She half-carried, half-dragged him down to the basement shelter, laying him on the makeshift bed he'd created there. His eyes were closed, his face drawn with exhaustion. "That was incredibly stupid," she said, tears she didn't understand streaming down her face. "Coming out in full daylight. You could have died." "Had to protect you," he murmured. "Had to protect them." "And who protects you, you idiot vampire?" His hand found hers in the darkness. "You do. You always have, even before we met. By building this place. By showing that predators can coexist peacefully. You gave me something worth protecting." Saskia stayed with him until he fell into the death-like sleep that vampires required for healing. Then she returned upstairs to check on her pack. The sanctuary wolves were agitated but unharmed, pacing their enclosure and looking toward the forest where their wild cousins had vanished. "You called them, didn't you?" she said to Freya, who stood at the fence watching her. "Somehow you communicated with the wild packs. Told them we needed help." Freya's amber eyes held wisdom Saskia was only beginning to understand. Wolves were more than she'd ever imagined, capable of cooperation, communication, and strategic thinking that science had barely scratched the surface of. And Alaric had somehow awakened or enhanced that capability. Over the next week, Saskia prepared for the Order's inevitable return. She contacted environmental organizations, governmental wildlife agencies, media outlets. She built a network of support that would make any attack on the sanctuary a public relations nightmare for the Order. She documented everything: the wild wolves' appearance, the Order's threats, the sanctuary's completely normal operations. She also made plans with Alaric. "When they come back, I'll be gone," he said one night as they sat with the wolves. "Truly gone this time. I'll lead them on a chase across Europe, make them believe I've abandoned this territory. Give you time to establish the sanctuary as untouchable. And then, I come back. If you'll have me." Saskia leaned against him, no longer bothered by his coldness. "I'll always have you. Your pack now, Alaric. Mine and theirs both." He wrapped his arm around her, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the wolves settle for the night. Freya approached the fence and settled down directly across from them, her presence a blessing and protection both. "I love you," Alaric said quietly. "I didn't think I could still feel that after so many centuries, but you've reminded me what it means to care about something more than survival." Saskia turned to look at him, seeing past the vampire to the person beneath, lonely, damaged, trying desperately to be better than his nature demanded. "I love you too, even though you're impossible and infuriating and bring danger wherever you go." "That's fair." They kissed, cold lips meeting warm, predator and protector finding common ground in shared purpose. The wolves watched, unbothered, accepting this strange alliance as they'd accepted so much else. The Order returned 3 months later, but they found a sanctuary transformed. Governmental oversight, media attention, and diplomatic pressure had made it untouchable. Wells and her team could only observe from a distance, frustrated but unable to act without triggering international consequences. Alaric was nowhere to be found. As promised, he'd vanished, leaving trails across Europe that kept the Order chasing shadows. Saskia ran the sanctuary alone, her work gaining recognition and funding as her methods proved successful. But on clear nights, when the moon was full and the wolves were restless, she would open the gate. And a shadow would emerge from the forest, not quite human, not quite animal, but something between. The wolves would greet him with joy, and together they would run through the mountain wilderness, predator and pack moving as one. Saskia would watch from the ATV, her heart full, knowing she'd found something most people never experienced, a love that transcended species, mortality, and every rational objection. A love as wild and free as the wolves themselves. Sometimes Henrik would visit, shaking his head at the strangeness of it all but unable to deny the results. The sanctuary thrived, the wolves were healthier than ever, and Saskia had never been happier. "You know this can't last forever," he warned her once. "He's immortal. You're not. Eventually I'll die, and he'll grieve, and life will go on," Saskia interrupted. "But we'll have had this time together. These years of running with wolves and building something beautiful. That's enough. Is it?" She looked toward the forest where Alaric ran with the pack, his laughter carrying on the night wind. "Yes. It's more than enough." The Order eventually gave up their pursuit, declaring Alaric either destroyed or relocated beyond their jurisdiction. Wells retired, bitter but defeated. The sanctuary became renowned worldwide as a model for wolf rehabilitation, with researchers coming from across the globe to study Saskia's methods. And through it all, on nights when the world slept and wildness ruled, a vampire and a wolf whisperer ran together through ancient forests, protected by wolves who understood that some bonds transcended the boundaries between species, between life and death, between human and monster. They were pack. They were family. They were proof that even in a world of hunters and zealots, love could survive in the wild places where predators learned to trust and shadows learned to hope. Years later, when Saskia's hair began to gray and her steps grew slower, Alaric offered her a choice: remain mortal and live a natural span, or join him in immortality. She chose mortality, wanting to experience life's natural cycle, to remain fully human even as she walked beside something inhuman. "I'll miss you," Alaric said, holding her on her final night, decades after their first meeting. "I'll miss you too," Saskia whispered. "But the wolves will remain. Take care of them when I'm gone. Keep the sanctuary going. That's how you'll honor what we built together. I promise." When she died, peaceful and surrounded by the wolves she devoted her life to protecting, Alaric kept that promise. He became the sanctuary's shadow guardian, protecting it through generations of caretakers who never quite understood why the wolves seemed to listen to the night wind, or why they occasionally ran with something that moved too fast to see clearly. The sanctuary endured, a haven where predators found peace and where the boundary between wild and civilized blurred into something beautiful. And on clear nights, those with sharp eyes might see a figure standing at the forest's edge, ageless, watching, protecting the legacy of a woman who'd taught a vampire what it meant to truly live. The wolves knew. They always had. And they passed that knowledge down through generations, a secret kept in howls and pack bonds, and the ancient understanding that sometimes love transcended every law of nature. This was the gift Saskia Morven left the world, proof that predators could protect, that monsters could love, and that in the wild places where shadows run with wolves, anything was possible.